Hi, this is Terry. Welcome to Omdia's Digital Leaders Podcast. Today, I'm going to be talking to Hansa about continuous application modernization. Now, Hansa, in our last episode, we discussed how a lot of digital transformation wasn't strategic. And in fact, how some of it wasn't even transformative. So, if IT isn't being strategic or transformative, what on earth are they doing?
Good question, Terry. They are just spending their time keeping the lights on, keeping the networks on, and we do a survey of 6,000 plus enterprise customers annually called the Omdia Enterprise Insight Survey, and the latest results for this year's survey show that 53% or more of the IT budget is spent on keeping the lights on. So that does not leave much for innovation.
When I did a lot of budgeting work with organizations, it was about 80%. So I think they're lying to us. I think they're spending a lot less on strategy and on transformation. I think they're just keeping their lights on.
Yeah, obviously, and there's also a lot of difference in how an enterprise defines innovation. So, what is innovative for enterprise A might not be there for enterprise B. It might just be keeping the lights on. So, there are going to be discrepancies. Also, there is a variation on based on which vertical that enterprise operates in. Some of them, which are highly, on the industrial side, like manufacturing, have more of their budget going towards running the business rather than innovation, while we have enterprises from retail and maybe financial services which have kind of an even split between the two. So but essentially the problem is that IT is still viewed as a cost center. It's still viewed as something that is a support function and the back office. And Terry, this is something that we've spoken about in our previous episodes, that we need to come out of that mindset that IT is there to do exclusively what business asks it to do.
Yeah, well, why do we need to come out of that mindset? I mean, um, so what? IT's job is the back office. Who cares?
Well, it is, but at the same time, technology is at the heart of the business these days. And when you go into the whole digital economy, digital era that we are living in right now, the market is moving, the customers' demands are moving at lightning speed, and it is unless you have that innovative backbone, it becomes extremely difficult for a company to quickly switch, tracks or switch directions.
Yeah, I would think that we all talk about how companies must become more digital. I would suggest, and here's a little question for you, how much of what your company does, especially with work from home, but how much of what your company does not have a digital component?
except for except for the physical production of items. Oh, even those are digital touch points, because your supply chain is digital. Your shop floor has IoT devices and and machinery, basically, that it's controlled by humans, which generates data. So essentially everything has one aspect or another that is touched by digital. So categorizing things as digital and analog is very, very difficult, except for maybe a bag of potato chips. Everything else that goes behind producing those potato chips is got a digital touch point.
So let's come back to this. Why are we spending all our time and money on running the old systems if digital is the way that we need to be thinking? If we need to think every aspect of business has a digital component, why are we spending all our time in the run space of IT?
Because for, I would say, more than 85% of enterprises, legacy becomes a ball and chain that's dragging them down. Their decisions around technology, choice around architecture, everything is influenced by the fact that they have these legacy apps still running in the background. And there's been layers of complexity that has been built onto these platforms and applications over the years in the name of modernizing them or digitizing them. I'm putting my fingers up and doing the quotation marks here, because it just it makes the system more brittle, and it doesn't really get rid of the legacy. It just hides it behind multiple layers of makeup or so-called digital technologies are just built on top.
In you just raised a point there. In about 2000 odd, I did some work for a courier company and a post
Hmm.
office postal company. They still ran their postal tracking system on DOS.
DOS. You're kidding me.
DOS.
Oh,
No,
wow.
they still ran it. Nobody knew nobody knew how it worked, why it worked, but they just dealt with the inputs and outputs of the data to this DOS package, and they ran it on that. They were in deep trouble because if something went wrong with a legacy system,
Yep.
where were they going to be?
Very true. And that also brings us to the point that when we talk about why they keep running these old antique systems, it's because they're too afraid to touch it. Nobody knows what's in there. It's like a black box. It's like a black hole where nobody wants to take the risk of trying to remove or completely retire those legacy systems. And that, I think that fear is something that holds people back. And when we talk about modernization, what we hear most frequently used is, we are refactoring the solution, so we are just taking the code, migrating it to cloud, blah blah blah. But that's not the right approach.
Yeah, I was carrying on with your point of there's this fear of getting rid of legacy because they're so embedded. But I was talking to Al Blake, one of our principal analysts in Australia today, and I said to him, he was talking about something cool, and I said, but nobody gets fired for sticking to tradition. And I said, and often not making decisions is the least risky option that an individual can take, especially in government and NGOs, and probably in many large corporates as well. So, what we're talking about, you and I, we're talking about you've got to modernize, you've got to move. A lot of CIOs, bless them, are not interested in moving in modernization. Why? Because career wise, it's safer for them to stick with the legacy. They ain't going to be fired for the legacy because somebody else did it.
So I think you're right. Sticking to the known path is safer, and you know that everybody else is doing it. So it's not. I'm not like a somebody who's a weirdo out there, while all of my other CIO peers are doing something, and I'm doing something in the different direction. But then, unless you challenge that mindset and you change it, you're never going to uh, you know make your business truly innovative. So I think you what you hit on the point is like, yeah, it's easier to follow tradition.
I think also one of the issues is it's not about, and I was thinking about this the other day, is how in the 1950s your average organization, large organization, lasted about 60 years. It's now down to under 20. So we're not talking about digital as a uh, cool transformative thing. We're talking about digital as a matter of survival and moving your budget into transformative and strategic is a matter, as far as I'm concerned, and I think you, of survival. So, what do we do about it? How do we move away from the run the operation to more strategic and transformative things? How do we move away our budgets and our resources and our time and our software? How do we move that all away from what I call below the line to above the line? And the line being, what do we need to do to keep this business running as it is now?
Good question, Terry. And the thing is that there's always going to be a certain part of the budget that has to be around running the infrastructure. You cannot get rid of that. So so you cannot. So we are not talking about saying that okay, no, you cannot spend on run the business anymore. Yes, you should spend on run the business anymore because that provides stability. That provides the foundational base for running the rest of your applications, in your cloud-based systems and the rest of your business. But then the proportion is too high on the budget, so it's disproportionately high towards run the business. So you need to bring it down. So when we talk about the legacy ball and chain that holds people down, the holds enterprises down, and we have had multiple approaches to modernization over the last 15 years I've been covering space. So I've heard about ripping and replacing systems with a commercial off the shelf solution or building a custom one, which nobody favors anymore because it's too risky, takes too long, and does not really deliver expected results. Also it's time consuming, which and time is a commodity that nobody has these days. The other two still popular options are refactoring and re-architecting, but neither of them essentially retire the legacy system. When you refactor, all you're doing is migrating the code to a newer language, and you're just cloudifying it. That's adding one layer of makeup, as I call it. The other one is re-architecting, which is a bit more involved. Applications are redesigned, and you're adding but adding middleware and extracting logic and rules and making them easier, and turning them into APIs. But still, the legacy is in the background. The beast still lies dormant.
Yeah, I think this is the issue here is you're bypassing the beast, not, I don't want to say killing the beast, but you're not disposing of the beast. Let's call it that. So they're flawed approaches, but why are they flawed? I mean, so what? We can quarantine a system, and we can, much like my post office, quarantine a system, just deal with the inputs and outputs, or we can refactor or what. Why is that not where we want to be taking organizations?
Because when that beast still hides in the background, so that legacy application is still in one way or the other dictating your choices. It dictates the choice of technologies that will work. It dictates the choice of architecture. It dictates, and the worst part is you accumulate technical debt. This is something that me, Terry, and Al in our team, we discuss at practically all our meetings, and we write extensively about, is that technical debt is a mountain, or it's like an iceberg. There's a whole lot of it under the water which nobody wants to touch. You spend more time, or IT teams spend more time dealing with the part that is visible above the water. It's like, okay, I have 30% of my technical debt which needs to be solved now. Let's just keep fixing that. Let's forget everything else that lies underneath. And again, this technical debt influences choice of architecture. It influences choice of technology. It influences how well digital technologies mesh with everything else and work.
Okay, I'm sold, but then I think I started sold. But we're hoping that our listeners are also sold. So, what's the alternative to kind of traditional approaches? What's the alternative to retiring or refactoring or They're all re-architecting, retire, refactor. What's the alternative?
The alternative here is to change the mindset about how modernization is perceived. At Omdia, I'm calling it the continuous application modernization, or CAM approach. So most most modernization programs are seen as finite. They have a beginning point, they have an end point, and they have milestones and checkpoints in between. KPIs and SLAs are used to monitor how the program is progressing. And once a certain, let's say, an application is refactored or re-architected, the modernization program is done. But that is not how it works. When we talk about digital transformation, we always call it a journey, Terry, right? So we're always taking the transformation journey and so
Yeah.
on. But modernization has to be a journey as well, because as your business changes, your systems have to change, your systems have to adapt. You cannot add layers and upon layers on and while still keeping the legacy beast alive. You have to ultimately get rid of it. So we are talking about the CAM approach, where they're saying that don't follow what everybody else does. You have to change your mindset. You have to look at opportunities to make your systems more efficient, make it run better, make it cost effective at the same time. There is a way to get it done. The tools already are there in the enterprise. Iterative practices, agile processes and principles, and or the low code no code tools, CI/CD, DevSecOps, all of this is part of CAM. There's so it's not essentially advocating something really new. It's saying that you have the tools in place. Take those tools and leverage them, and at the same time change your mindset. It's like, I can't stop. I can't stop because the business is changing, the systems are changing, digital technologies are constantly changing. So why should my modernization approach stop? So essentially, it's taking modernization from being a finite thing to something that becomes a day-to-day activity. So it essentially becomes run the business eventually.
So, CAM, continuous application modernization. I think we need to repeat that a few times. Um, CAM is a will become a run the business activity. And I like that idea. I really do. Let's ask this question. So, what is CAM? What is continuous application modernization? Not what it does, not what the benefits are. What are we talking about? And then we'll come back to what are the benefits of achieving this kind of mindset. And it is a mindset.
At the development layer, CAM or continuous application modernization advocates that once you have done, let's say, a large scale program where you have re-architected a platform or a solution, you go back and take a look at the technical depth that lies behind it and that has accumulated over years, and then you start breaking those down into manageable chunks, and then and you start building on them iteratively, incrementally. And okay, these are the most critical issues that need to get solved, but then the idea here is to not stop. Is You have to get rid of as much of the technical debt as possible. So you break it down into smaller piecemeal approaches. You use microservices architectures. You quarantine the legacy system, which is already something that is happening when you're re-architecting. You're doing it. You have done it. It's not something that you don't know. But the thing here, the objective here, is that ultimately you have to retire that legacy solution.
So, what you're saying to me, and that's because my mind works this way, but you're saying you're taking an iterative kind of agile approach to applications and
Yes.
legacy. So you're saying what
Yes.
parts of it can we break out, move on, what parts, etc. And guess what? You're going to be pivoting, you're going to be budgeting iteratively, you're going to be doing all of those things to modernize and, in fact, kill the beast in the end.
Yes, yes. So bit by bit, it's not nobody's asking you to go into the beast chamber and try to fight it down. It's taking a let's take it out piece by piece. This what can I do now? This is what I have done so far, and I'm sure most of our listeners have managed some modernization project or the other, and you know how it works. And Agile has, which was 10, 12 years ago, a completely new thing, is now mainstream. There's hardly anybody who doesn't use Agile processes anymore, and everybody has access to CI/CD tools, low code, no code tools, which take a lot of the guesswork and the risk out of getting rid of the legacy. So all that needs to be done is to not be afraid of getting rid of the beast.
Yeah, it seems to me that there's two key elements here: is the iterative agile approach, and the other is microservices, and link that with no code, low
Yes.
code. So what you're doing is you're almost taking a function from your old system. Call it let's call it customer take on, something like that. You're taking that function and
Mm-hmm.
you're removing it from the old system, putting it into using low code, no code, or real code, and you're putting it into a microservice.
Yes.
So I think I'm trying to understand this. So your first step for me would be to look at your application, the legacy application, and say, what are the functions of this application? Ignore the technology behind it. What business processes, if you want, does it perform? And then now let's replace it business process by business process. And again, ignore the technology. But that means you have to switch off the business process, if you will, of the legacy system once you replace it.
You don't need to. You are essentially quarantining. We have containerization these days. So you have Kubernetes, you have so many other
Okay.
containers where you quarantine that particular function or the business process. And then and then once that whole process has been modernized, has been migrated or re-architected and brought to the digital age, at that point of time, you're safe. You're in a good place to shut that down. But without losing
Yeah.
functionality. So there's minimal to no disruption if it's done right. And people have experience of doing it right. It's not like something you haven't done before. When you re-architected a solution, that's precisely what you did. You quarantine parts of it, change the architecture, you modernize the code, but unfortunately, you left the legacy behind. What CAM advocates is don't leave the
Mm,
legacy behind. Remove it. Get rid of it. You don't still need to have those monolithic
yeah.
legacy touch points existing anymore because they don't add value to the business. In fact, they hinder it.
Okay. Okay. So before we get on to benefits, which I think are self evident, um, where's the future of CAM? Because what I'm in my head, I'm thinking, okay, fine, you've gotten rid of all your legacy systems. Do you still need to continuously modernize your applications? Because remember now they're all in microservices.
Yes, you
They're all
do.
micro applications.
Yes, that's where it becomes run the business, right? Because business needs change.
Ah,
Technology changes. Everything, a lot of stuff is now SaaS. And when you talk about continuous upgrades, or for example, Oracle talks about you never need to upgrade again. We'll take care of all of it in the background. But that is just one part of it. They might make the change on their platform, their solution. That still needs to work with whatever else you have running in your enterprise.
ah,
So that is why the
okay.
continuous modernization process keeps going. When we talk about, let's take the concept of CI/CD. It talks about continuous integration and development, and now you have continuous testing and so on. So it's a similar concept. Make continuous modernization a part of your daily activity. Make it a run the business thing rather than something that is a behemoth, multi-million, multi-year project that begins, ends, and then you go back to business as usual for another 2 3 years. Then you decide, hey, you know what, I have to do it all over again. So you're preventing that all over again thing from happening, and essentially you're saving time, you're saving money. Let's face it, Terry, legacy is expensive. You need specialized skills
Oh,
to run it. Maintaining it takes a lot of effort and money. And every time you're making a technical decision, or you're trying to introduce some digital technology, you have to always think of, oh my God, this is still there. What do I do with it? Will it like this? Will it will it allow my systems to work or not? And if something happens when you're implementing a new technology or a new architecture that breaks the link to the legacy system, you have widespread disruption.
yeah.
And by completely getting rid of it and building a CAM approach, you essentially solve that issue. You kind of put a lot of pieces together, and you help your enterprise IT to be as fluid as the rest of the businesses.
And I think with modern EA, enterprise architecture tools, you can pull those microservices, micro functions, micro processes together in a way that I daren't say you don't need an application, but you need a business area that is served by all these microservices rather than a business area served by a general ledger program or yeah,
Exactly.
which
Exactly. So it makes it more elastic. And one of the prime benefits of that CAM can bring is the fact that it reduces shadow IT spend.
yeah.
And in many cases, we have seen in our surveys that shadow IT can be as much as 25 to 30% of the organization's IT budget, which is spent in excess of what you spend on IT.
Yeah, no, I've seen numbers larger than that because
Oh,
there's
really?
some IT that's not even shadow IT, and in fact the 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 marketing budget for IT, the marketing department's budget have been growing at about I think 7%, whereas IT budgets have been growing at 5%. Something,
5%,
yeah,
yes.
something like that. But marketing budget for IT has been growing faster because remember, we're talking all about digital marketing and the like. Those budgets have
Mm-hmm.
been, and that's not shadow IT. That is out in the open, but guess what? It's still IT. So I think you're
Yep.
right about the shadow IT budget, but and I'm not sure I want to reduce shadow IT. I think you need to, in the same way that you're thinking radically about how do we replace legacy, what you need to do with shadow IT is incorporate it into the big picture of, yeah, somebody's doing some shadow IT. Guess what? It's a microservice. Let's see how that fits with the jigsaw that we're putting together here.
Yeah, exactly. So that's what I meant, bringing shadow IT to the fold of the overall IT budget, and making sure, because your business functions do not have to spend on technology separately if they already have the tools available to them provided by the IT department. And that also solves the issues of security, also solves the issue of compliance and access, and so on. So reduces the amount of touch points that cyber criminals can exploit.
Yeah, I've always believed that um, encourage shadow IT, but own the last mile. Before anything goes live, you own that space so that you can operationalize, do the capacity planning, do the provisioning, do the security, all of the things that IT never gets thanked for, but you need to be able to do those kind of things. All right. I think we've made a case for continuous application modernization. I think it reduces risk, it reduces cost, it reduces shadow IT. I
Mm-hmm.
think we're there
Yep.
with that. Here's my thought: is the future is iterative and the future is agile. They're different things. So
It
before
is.
IT can position itself in the future, perhaps they need to be thinking less monolithic and more iterative, agile, resilient. In fact, because resilience, if you have, let's not talk about the Titanic, but if you have if you have a Titanic versus uh, 2,000 smaller boats, what would the disaster have looked like compared to the Titanic? And I think that's really what you're trying to say. Am I right there?
Yes, absolutely. It's like, you don't have to wait for a disaster to happen before you realize that, hey, you know what, I should have done this ages ago. It's a time to take the call that, okay, this is, and the pandemic has put everything in stark perspective in the last
Yeah.
18 months, and we're still in the middle of a pandemic. So you can see the way that businesses have had to adapt. They were forced to adapt. And we have heard this over and over again from many different places that digital agendas have been accelerated, but at the cost of what? At the cost of ignoring
Yeah.
legacy. Like, hey,
Yeah.
you know what, I need to build the latest system that will help me, move my goods from my warehouse to the retail store as fast as I can. Let's put the legacy thing on hold for now. So what happens now? You're building more technical debt. You're
Yeah.
making that iceberg bigger, and a lot
Yeah.
of it is still underwater. You have no idea what's going on under there. And one fine day, you might have a Titanic on your hands. Let's not get to that point. So it's a CAM is a measure of being proactive. It's like, okay, let's proactively take an approach and take a look at this. Let's change how let's get rid of the word modernization completely. Let's call it a process.
Mm.
Let's call it
Mm.
continuous. When you say continuous, you know that it is a thing that you do every day. You don't have to wait for something to happen
Yeah.
and suddenly realize that, oh my god, I need to modernize my system.
So let's introduce a new word here before we close off. Continuous operationalization. Gosh, that's a long word. Of your application. It's a long word. Continuous operationalization of your applications. How do you make sure that they are continuously operating and
Yeah.
operational and
Yeah,
into the
and they have
future?
to operate at a high level also, because that's what digital demands. You cannot have
Yeah,
downtimes.
yeah,
You cannot take 5 days off to apply an upgrade, or shut things down. Your business is
yeah,
24/7. Your customers expect 24/7 service. So to achieve that, you
yeah.
have to bring that change in mindset. You have to get rid of the technical debt that you've accumulated, and you have to let go of the beast. It's time to let it go. And I think with that, we will close this episode. The report, It's Time Continuous Application Modernization Became Mainstream, is available on omdia.com, as is other research from Terry, me, and Al. Terry and I can be reached via askananalyst at omdia.com. That's askananalyst at omdia.com. So if you have any questions for us, feel free to drop us a line. Join us in our next episode, where we will have a very special guest. Look out for more details on that. Until then, stay safe. You have been listening to the Omdia Digital Leaders Podcast.